Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
The United Nations elections for the seat of the International Court of Justice took an interesting turn when there was a direct face-off between the Indian nominee Dalbir Bhandari and UK nominee Christopher Greenwood. What followed, in the words of late External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj, was a second war of independence and a David versus Goliath fight against the mighty P5 in the Security Council. But how did India manage to secure the seat in spite of starting the campaign a year late, and how did it disrupt the existing order? To answer these questions and much more, joining me today for the discussion is India's former permanent representative to the United Nations from 2016 till his retirement from the Indian Foreign Service in 2020, and now the Dean of Kautilya School of Public Policy, is Amb Syed Akbaruddin. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Ratnadeep.
So, sir is out with a new book, India versus UK, the story of an unprecedented diplomatic win. So, sir, firstly, congratulations on the book and taking the time and speaking to us. I was convinced this book is nothing sort of diplomatic thriller where it's just not it arrests a various range of audience, not just to us young students interested in foreign policy or foreign policy professionals, but young Indians who might be interested in knowing what happens in multilateral stakeholders, what happens with multilateral stakeholders who get involved in an election. So my first question is, why is the story of 2017 ICJ election so special, and why did you choose to write the book?
First of all, thank you very much for your very gracious introduction. I don't know whether I deserve it, but I'm grateful to you for that. That said, I wrote the book with several things in mind. And one of the things that you referred to, why an election? Now, an election usually in international affairs brings to bear everything that a country is engaged in. At the UN, it means that it's a popularity contest of sorts of the entire membership of the UN. But this election was unique. It was an election where two sitting judges of the ICJ faced against each other. It's never happened in the history of the United Nations and the International Court of Justice that two sitting judges faced each other. Number two, it was an election where, for the first time, a permanent member was pitted against a non-member of the UN Security Council and yet lost. That makes it unique. Number three is it's a reflection of the tectonic shifts that are happening in the global order. You may not see it now, but it's clear that the global membership of the UN is not willing to accept what was an order which was set up, say now 75 years ago. And these are signals of change in the making. So for all these reasons, I thought it would be a good example to show how foreign policy works. Now, one last comment is that foreign policy can be viewed in different ways. You can talk about abstract concepts like balance of power, collective security, sovereignty, etc. Or you can look at it differently and say human beings are also involved in foreign policy, and under pressure, how do human beings function? Ultimately, they can't be foreign policy without human beings. So I thought to bring out the human element, I should attack in a different way. And that's why I made it much more oriented towards a common audience, because foreign policy interest today is not limited to a niche area. Foreign policy is no longer foreign in that context, because large number of Indians look at opportunities outside, have engagements outside, know that what is happening outside is also impacting them. So for them, we need to humanize foreign policy, and that was my attempt through this book.
So India decided to focus initially on only the International Tribunal for the Law of Seas and the International Law Commission election, So what transpired in between that India decided to contest that election?
So, in life, we all plan for something, but circumstances change. What were the circumstances that changed in 2017 as far as India was concerned was the decision that we took to change course in our approach toward the International Court of Justice. Until 2017, India as a country was reticent in engaging global institutions to address issues between India and Pakistan, because we always felt these are bilaterally to be addressed and to be resolved bilaterally. Here we found an opportunity that we could stall the death sentence that was pronounced on an Indian national by a Pakistani court by pointing out that it was not in accordance with Pakistan's multilateral engagements. It was a sea change in foreign policy. And crucial to this was the International Court of Justice. Now that the International Court of Justice was being looked at in a different way than before, previously we thought it's somewhere far away in The Hague, no direct interest for India. So if we have a judge, it's okay. If we don't have a judge, also it's okay. But we realize the importance of the institution which is setting norms about international law, which all big countries have a stake in. So we decided that, look, rather than be sporadically engaged with such an important institution, it's important to have a permanent presence there. And that's what's changed. And it helped in the outcome because the court then held our plea, and as of today, the issue of the difficulties between India and Pakistan on that specific matter still have ensured that the death sentence on Jadhav has not been carried forward.
So the traditional route might also be to look for an ad hoc judge that period of time. So why not use the traditional route and go for election?
That's true. There would have been a option of as you said, an alternate judge or ad hoc judge, etc. But if you were a decision maker and you had a judge on the panel, and you would say, I allow the judge to retire and I will opt for an ad hoc judge. Do you think that as a decision maker, people would be favorable to that decision? It's clear. Because ad hoc judge has certain limitations. A permanent judge has a different persona on the court. Also, it's not about one case. While we shifted course and the consequential actions required us, but as a country which has now diverse interests, multiple interests, global interests, I think it's not unusual for us to think that we should also have a judicial presence at the highest level. So while there was a trigger and a catalyst, but this is a long-term, it is in our long-term interest to have a judge like all big countries and powerful countries have. If a judge is important for the great powers, and if India aspires for that, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have.
So India started campaigning a year later than other countries, and yet it managed to garner support and stay in the game. So what made that possible? And even you were cautioned by the West African permanent representative that the Lebanese colleague Nawaf Salam had started campaigning 20 years before.
So, generals fight with the armies they have and the situations they confront, not with what we want. This is never an ideal situation to contest. Yes, I was also very reticent that we are faced with such a challenge. But sometimes when challenges arise, people stand up. And in this case, Indian diplomacy globally was marshalled. Every Indian mission worked towards that goal. Also, our leadership was there in the forefront, wanting to facilitate our diplomats and to respond to their needs. So it was a unique experience. It couldn't have happened without the time frame being compressed. Ordinary elections are handled normally by diplomats. This was an extraordinary election, and it produced an extraordinary result because the efforts made by Indian diplomats, Indian political leaders, Indian what I would say is the Indian diplomatic fraternity. There were many friends of India who helped. Some I have referred to in the book, some I can't refer to also because they are not even diplomats, but who provided us pathways towards goals which we otherwise would not have seen. So, an extraordinary result requires extraordinary effort and whatever you call it, luck, good fortune, God's grace, something more than what humans did, and in this case, that was with us.
So, since you're talking about leadership, the late Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj, as you described in the book, was a diligent minister who was hands-on accessing the viability of any option. And as I read the book more, I found out about she's a person willing to take risks. And so my question is, what was your distinct memory of working with her, and how was her approach different from the other probably foreign ministers you worked with?
So, one needs to acknowledge that India has been fortunate in having very many excellent external affairs ministers. And we've had many people who've brought a distinctive approach to it. So I don't want to make a comparison, and I don't think it's fair to do that. But if I look at my own engagement with Mrs. Swaraj, she was, as I said, a very hands-on minister, and I'll give you many examples, not only related to the election. When she first became a minister, one of the crises that we faced related to bringing back Indian students from Ukraine, Indian nationals from Iraq, and also from Yemen. And in each of these cases, she was so diligent. If we set up a telephone line to respond to queries, she would incognito call that telephone line and check whether the responses were adequate or not. So, in one case, she even found out that one of the lines that we had put up was not even functioning. So, she was very meticulous in her approach. She also consulted widely. She would engage with other segments of the political spectrum to understand that her decisions would enjoy broader support. And finally, she provided us with the opportunities to take risks and to, in difficult situations, provided us some leeway to do things that, like normal humans, we sometimes falter, we sometimes make wrong suggestions, but she understood that and was always there supportive. So if there is a big hero in this book, it is her.
So, moving forward, I want to understand if you could tell us how state garner votes, like you mentioned about active groupism, like for example, Arab groups like the OIC, and using the regional countries card among themselves. Also using multilateral forums that they have used, and how United Nations elections are transactional in nature. You mentioned in one of the parts that India has used its cards, and for the ICJ election, it's become difficult.
So, every election means opportunities for some states or some individuals to go up the ladder by getting elected. Also, it provides opportunities for other countries to support or not to support and gain by that. Ultimately, states are in the business of promoting their interests. So, everybody looks to leverage some aspect or the other. So, elections provide multiple opportunities for leverage. And so, elections of this nature, which are two elections in one, actually, the ICJ, provide multiple opportunities. Now, how states use this, how states work on this, is normal part of diplomacy. So, if I come and request you something, you will always say, right, I can do it, but I need something else from you. The wider the state's canvas, the greater the breadth of his diplomacy, the greater possibility of leverages. And that's why sometimes permanent members use that to their own advantage. But a country like India has also vast interest. We are today engaged with more than 130 countries with resident missions, but also with non-resident missions providing assistance, development cooperation, a whole array of engagements. And that helps a country that you can leverage some aspect in some other aspect. And that's the nature of UN elections or any elections, that people try and maximize their benefit from that.
And if you could recall your conversation with the France ambassador about you saying that you used 2 cards already, and how did later that transpired of them garnering support for India?
So it's true that we had entered into an agreement with not only France but some other countries also, that we would support them in lieu of earlier support that they had provided in other elections. So we lost that opportunity with them. However, sometimes the big opportunity is lost, but there are smaller opportunities available. And that's what happens in such issues, that, okay, you lose the big card. Yes, we didn't have anything to give up with some countries, because we had already promised them their quota of what they wanted for the year, for the month, for several years perhaps, etc. But that is for a vote. But less than a vote, there are many other requirements, sometimes process oriented, sometimes advice, sometimes help of unusual ways. Now, those are new areas which have come up, and with the case of France, we did gain some support from them, and that was purely because it was a serious effort by our leadership to engage with their foreign minister when he came here. Now, if at that level, states will find it very difficult to say no to smaller requests. So, while we may give up bigger leverages, small leverages for a country like India are always available.
So, 2 of the shocking facts that I came across in the book include US diplomats lobbying against India, and Japan did not responding to India's desperate plea. So tell us more about it, and in spite of having strong bilateral ties with both these countries, why did they choose to go against us?
So, I think why they chose, this is for you to ask them. But that said, yes, it is true that the US, let's take one by one. The US was not unexpected, because their ties with the UK, there being both permanent members on the Security Council, it was only expected that they would be supportive of the UK in any contest with us, and we were comfortable with that. But what was surprising for us was that the US also started lobbying for the UK, which was unusual, because in fights between 2 friends, it's best for people who consider themselves as friends of both to stay out of it, while their own choice they can make. And to the credit of the then permanent representative of the United States, Ambassador Nikki Haley, she, when I approached her, at the request of one of my colleagues, Ambassador Sarna, when I approached her, she was very prompt. So while there will be in any establishment some people who push in some way, Ambassador Nikki Haley's decision to immediately stop that also reveals that India has friends too in that establishment. So it's only a tussle between friends, and sometimes the pendulum swings one way and sometimes the other way. That's about the US.
And mentioning of friends, you also mentioned this anecdote of a person who called himself friends was going and lobbying against India as well.
That's right. So this gentleman, and I don't think it's fair to name him, but he served in India for several years. He was introduced to me by many colleagues who had worked with him when he was in India as a friend of India. But he was also posted in some other South Asian countries because, or perhaps when he was working in India, he was engaged with them, etc.
So one of the important points that you mentioned in the book is that bigger states dithered while smaller states stood by. The UK was using multiple tactics to keep the smaller states away from voting, and you mentioned some of them as well. Yet they stood their ground. So what was the role of the small states in this election and our neighbors especially?
So I need what we need to do is just step back and look at India as a country. We have now global interests, so we will need to engage people from diverse regions with diverse interests. Sometimes we engage with the big. If the big don't work out with us, we engage with the not so big. If the not so big don't work out, we engage with this those who don't even want to consider themselves as big. They take pride in saying we are small. So our idea was that for a country like us, we should have ability to engage broad sections. And so if one section doesn't work out, we try and balance it out with others. Now, it is normal for countries to try every trick in the bag to maximize their influence. So I don't think that the UK wanting to focus on small states, yes, they did try and focus because they are head of the Commonwealth, they thought Commonwealth connection would work, but let's not forget, India is a sizable presence in the Commonwealth, so we could also counter. India is increasingly now a big development partner to many Commonwealth countries. Similarly, in our neighborhood, all the smaller states were all supportive of us for various reasons because they see their interests tied with India in multiple ways. Yes, we leveraged every opportunity, and our engagement with small states precedes this election. We've had a summit of small states in multiple ways. For example, we've had with the Pacific Island small states. We had 2 summits even before the election. So there is an engagement of our leaderships with that. We've also had the whole of Africa summit, India and whole of Africa, 54 states. So you can see that all these play into the election. We may not connect the dots at that stage, but those dots are connected in some form or the other because when leaders meet in different ways, they carry back home good feelings and memories that plays some time or the other in some factor. Now I think all these played into the election process.
So narratives that came out during the elections about disrupting the current order and colonialism, and even Sushma Swaraj quote on Second War of Independence. How did this narrative help India, and what did India do to persuade the other countries to not vote for the joint conference?
So the joint conference was an interesting mechanism, and the UK felt that this was the only way to get out of a pathway that was leading to certain defeat. So they came up with this clever initiative, and kudos to them that they took out example which had not been used in the history of the UN ever, or the ICJ ever. It was used in the predecessor to the ICJ and the predecessor to the UN at the time of its founding in 1921 or sometime like this. So they did a remarkable job of ferreting out through their research that there could be a pathway. So I think where they faltered was they had hoped that in the Security Council that they were getting 9 votes regularly and we were getting 6 votes. They hoped all these 9 votes which are being voted in secret ballot will be able to be converted in an open ballot. Unfortunately, some countries were not willing to do that for reasons that perhaps they were telling both of us that they were voting for us. They didn't want to make a public choice of one of us, and that's where the UK faltered because they didn't have 9 votes. And We made some discreet effort through our own young people, through our leaders, etc., and we garnered one or two more in this bargain, and it was pretty clear for the UK that they would not get this thing passed. If they couldn't get this process passed, they had no other way out, and therefore they conceded the election.
So, even though some of the old guards mentioned that India should consider the deadlock in the election as a moral victory and look for bilateral agreements, as was lacking behind in the Security Council, you stood your ground and said that India was leading in the General Assembly on the suggestion of the Caribbean colleague that you met. So, what was this nugget about of leading in General Assembly leads to a victory?
So, many people think that diplomacy is all about glamorous discussions. But I wanted to mention that this book provides some examples of diplomacy and traditional modes of diplomacy being as important. So, you're referring to one of the whispers that one of my colleagues suggested to me. And this was based on his experience, and he said that he seemed to think that during the election when he was contesting, although they were losing in the Security Council, they were leading in the General Assembly, and that led to victory finally. So he just threw this nugget at me saying that maybe you should look at this. And then we got some of our young colleagues and a young intern to do research. Now, diplomats are not supposed to be the ones who do research. Most people think, oh, diplomats don't do research. But we did a lot of research. And we found out that not only in that case was it true, but in all previous cases, the trend line was those who lead in the General Assembly will win. So we were confident the moment the first vote took in the General Assembly and the gap was so vast, we were clear that it will lead, maybe in a laborious process, but lead to our victory. Many others who had not done their research, whether from in India or from outside, whether colleagues or not colleagues, were not able to discern this trend line. And therefore they came up with the other conclusion, because everybody, generally the generic viewpoint is Security Council is more important, and if you don't win in the Security Council, you can't win. But in this, the logic was very different, and we worked on that logic, and it finally paid dividends.
So, a couple of last questions I have. So, you have intertwined diplomacy with life lessons. They're very interesting in the book, where I find anecdotal examples and your life lessons. So, what is the biggest takeaway for a young audience from the world of diplomacy?
So, there are many takeaways. It depends on what perspective you come from. But one takeaway is that be patient. And the young, I know, are impatient by nature. All want instant change. International organizations are not about instant change. They move at a glacial pace. But change is inevitable if you keep pushing at it. Irrespective of what others say, change happens if you are persistent, if you are diligent, and if you have the confidence and the wherewithal to push that. So, all I would request many of my colleagues is to follow what the great Indian cricket captain MS Dhoni does. He waits patiently, he bides his time, and then he strikes towards the end. And that's what happened for us. Otherwise, we could have entered into some sort of a solution which was suboptimal. We waited for the time to get a optimal result. So, all I would request our young people is to be patient. Time is on your side. India has a future which is going to be better for all of you than it was for us. So be confident in that, and then bide your time for success.
Yeah. So there was an existing global order that was being disrupted by India, and some of the P5 members, of course, opposed it. Looking at the election, what are the biggest lessons, and going forward, what do you think will be India's role in the nation?
So if I can answer that correctly, I would be a sage on the stage. I can be your guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage. So I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question, because I've had my chance. I've done what I could do. It's for the young like you to look at the future, look at your positives, and areas where you need to improve, and maybe I should turn the tables and ask you, please give me this answer yourself.
I expected an answer from you, Ambassador, but it's way above my pay grade to answer this.
In diplomacy, there are no pay grades, because once you start representing a country, you represent the whole country. So I wish you success in whatever you are doing, and next time when you prepare your essay, this is your topic for discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for taking your time and speaking to us. It's an honor and a pleasure to host you. And I think I should shake your hands once, like the Pakistani gentleman.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir.